Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast Championship Weekend. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, there's only 2 games left this weekend, so I don't need to ask you which one's the most important game for playoff odds. Which one would you like to get into first?
Let's do them in order. Let's start with the Rams and the Saints in the early game.
So one thing I'm looking at in both of these games right off the bat is home field advantage. Largest difference between home passing yards per game and road passing yards per game. The Rams rank first in the NFL at 102 and the Saints third at 73. So the Rams at home average 347 yards per game, just 245 on the road. Saints 297 drops all the way down to 224 when they're on the road. That's a huge swing of about 175 overall. So I think that's one way that you can quantify just how important that is in this game. And I think that's a really big difference.
Well, actually, I was going to probably wait until we talked about Kansas City and the Patriots to talk about home field advantage. But this kind of opens up the idea because, like you said, that's a huge issue in both games, or seems like it. Here's the thing. I've always really wondered about the sort of home versus road stats for a single season. Because in the long term, any research we've done has basically shown that in the long term, teams don't have like a larger home field advantage than other teams. Like home field advantage is pretty equivalent across teams, with the exception of Seattle, possibly because they're so far away from the rest of there's a farther flying time, partly because of the volume in the stadium. So I never know how much to really account for these kinds of stats about whether a team is better at home versus road compared to other teams. And this, to sort of combine games for a moment, just to talk about this issue, this comes out a lot in looking at the Patriots versus Kansas City game, because the Patriots defense was number 2 in DVOA at home and number 31 on the road.
Right.
And yet at the same time, the Kansas City offense was better on the road than it was at home. And so I ask, if over 8 games, the Kansas City offense was better on the road than it was at home, 8 games on the road and 8 games at home, 16 games total, would that suggest that they would be not as good at home this week? I just have a hard time thinking that that's true. And when you look at something like the Patriots and how much their defense really struggled on the road this year, I mean, really bad. They had like 7 below average defensive games, and they were all on the road. But it's the same players that were on the team a year ago. It's basically the same defense as a year ago with 1 or 2 exceptions. Why would they suddenly lose the ability to play on the road any more than the natural home field advantage that exists for all teams?
So, I mean, you brought up so many good points. I don't even know where to start. One thing is you made me think of when we build our projections, for the reasons that you mentioned, we have to build home and road as kind of equivalent wherever they are, because we don't have any statistical proof, any reason to believe that New Orleans home field advantage is a greater home field advantage than Cleveland's home field advantage is. It's the same. Good teams have stronger home field advantages than poor teams, but that's because they're good teams. Just like that's another separate conversation when we talk about playoff home field advantage, because you already have favored teams that are hosting teams and oftentimes also coming off buys, as we saw the home teams all went 4-0 last weekend. So there are a few different things to like split out as we look into this, but we can't say this home field advantage is bigger than that one when we make these statistical projections, because we don't have any bearing to say that. Now, that said, saying that because we can't prove it, it doesn't exist, it's a little bit to me like saying that clutch doesn't exist. The famous paper on the hot hand in basketball, there's some great research that's come out, if people aren't familiar with it, that basically anybody who's ever tried to study the phenomenon of clutch in sports, and specifically in this case in basketball, hasn't been able to prove there's any reason to believe that it exists. You making your last shot has no impact on the likelihood of you making your next shot. You can define clutch a whole bunch of different ways. It's really hard to prove that it exists. We can't build it into our projections. That said, I don't know anybody that's ever watched Michael Jordan that doesn't think that clutch exists. And on some level, I think all of us believe that it exists, or people that have played, they feel like this is something that they've experienced. maybe we're just humans and it's a fallacy and we're all being silly here, but maybe there is something to it. And it's just really hard to bear these sort of things out in the numbers sometimes.
Whether certain teams have larger home field advantages than others, or whether in certain years, certain teams have larger home field advantages than others. Because that's, right. We're sort of talking here about the idea that, for example, that the Saints have a particularly strong home field advantage this year, or that the Patriots have particularly bad on the road this year. Because I'll share really interesting stats. Last year, Rams and Saints, mostly the same team on offense, both of those offenses were better on the road than they were at home in 2017. And the Patriots defense that was so bad on the road this year was actually better on the road than it was at home in 2017. So it's a really interesting question whether these splits for 1 year really matter when it's basically the same players that last year had the opposite split. Right. Now, this year, the Patriots, are terrible on defense on the road. This year, the Rams and Saints, like you said, DVOA agrees, better on offense at home. But with mostly the same players as a year ago, why would that be significantly different than it was a year ago?
Right, the famously low sample size sport that we have to deal with. I think it's interesting. I don't know if you caught, there was an awesome article that John Shirley put out on the Sports Info Solutions blog that analyzed whether or not home field advantage, how home field advantage has effects on the offense and defense. We know that it has a different effect on what your likelihood of winning is, but Josh Hermsmeyer did some research on 538 that was kind of pointing out you don't really see a difference in false start penalties, some of the things that you would expect to be the things that home field advantage actually has an impact on. John did some interesting research, and what he found was that home road, the amount of time that offensive tackles were giving up pressures on offense was vastly different, the blown block rates by these guys. So what he was able to tease out of that data there really showed that it's the use of the silent counts. And when you get into situations where teams have to use silent counts versus when you can use your normal cadence and everybody can hear things and it's nice and quiet in your home environment, it really affects how the tackles play and how they have to deal with those awesome athlete defensive ends. And intuitively, that makes sense. And it's a great read to see how he was able to tease that out of the data. And I think it's some really interesting work.
Well, that's interesting because now let's tie it back into New Orleans and the Los Angeles Rams. Okay, he talked about tackles giving up more blown blocks, but what about guards and centers? Because if you're the New Orleans Saints offense, you've got very strong tackles, and the fear of the other defense is all about the internal pass rush, primarily Aaron Donald, not the outside pass rush.
So Aaron Donald's always such an interesting special case because he's such an outlier. But John looked at those interior pressure numbers, and both in the run game and the pass game, there didn't seem to be a difference between home and road performance by the interior O-line. But for tackles, there was a difference, and even on outside run plays that were going, off tackle or outside, you saw a difference in the amount of expected yards before contact as well.
Now, flip it around, the Rams, well, their tackles, especially left tackle, spectacular, right? Andrew Whitworth was phenomenal last week. The Saints are going to bring more pressure. They have better defenders on the outside, especially without Sheldon Rankins in the game.
Right. One thing that we've seen the Saints been doing a whole lot of the time now is bringing a whole lot more pressure. And Eli Apple's a big part of the reason for that, I think. Since he's come in, you look at the numbers, they've applied considerably more pressure since the trade. They've been first in pressure rate as a defense since the trade at 41%. And I think a lot of that comes down to not Eli Apple being a world beater, but two things. Number one, he allows them to play that man defense and bring more blitzes in that Dennis Allen scheme, which they love to do. And two, okay, take the bad games of Eli Apple. They're not even close to the bad games by Ken Crawley. He's got some of the worst games in terms of total points, our division of credit metric, by a corner this season. And he barely even played this year. Because Eli Apple's played the majority of the season there. Definitely looking at that man defense and that pressure rate and how that'll interact with both offensive lines that have really been excellent all year.
Well, the other important thing for the Saints is they want to bring pressure and blitz because they were so bad this year against deep passes. They were last in DVOA against deep passes, and Jared Goff throws more deep passes than almost any quarterback in the league. And if they allow him to be comfortable in the pocket to throw deep, they are going to get burned.
So that's, I think, a big thing there. Can Goff get comfortable enough where he can take those shots down the field, and will that win out that weakness of the Saints? Or conversely, will the Saints be able to get to him and not allow him to hold on to the ball and get comfortable with these deep looks? Because Goff under pressure, the splits are ridiculous this year. So no pressure, he's at 74% completions. With pressure, just 39%. Yards per attempt drops from 9.5 to 5.0. IQR is 117 with no pressure, 63 under pressure. You're talking about some of the biggest splits that we've seen in the league this year. I think it's incumbent on the Saints to find a way to get after him.
The thing I think I want to point out about the Rams offense versus the Saints defense here is that there's such a huge matchup of strength against strength when it comes to the Rams running game, which was best in the league, versus the Saints run defense, which was third in DVOA, where opposed to 22nd against the pass. The Rams offense is not as run-focused, right, as people tend to think. They actually, in the first half of the game, they're only average in run-pass ratio. It's not like Seattle where they come out and run. Like a lot of the Rams, they're high in runs because of winning games second half of the game. But nobody run blocks as well as them. They set an all-time record in adjusted line yards. They also led the league in second-level yards. That's the yards that come 5 to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. And the Saints were really strong, second in adjusted line yards, third, like I said, in run defense DVOA. Although it's interesting, they get most of their run tackles from linebackers and from safety Von Bell, not from the defensive line. So it's interesting to ask how much the loss of Rankins is actually going to affect things. They were much better against runs on the outside than they were against runs up the middle.
So you brought up how good the Rams offensive line has been in run blocking this year. And I want to give a shout out to their offensive line coach, Aaron Cromer, run game coordinator, all that kind of stuff. He was the offensive line coach in New Orleans with Sean Payton and Dennis Allen back when I was there. And he's got a kind of a underrated role, I think, in what he's brought to this Rams offense, because Sean McVay, we all, boy genius, all that kind of stuff. But he's really a passing game guy. That's really more of his expertise. And Cromer is the guy that's running that run game for them. And Cromer and Payton are guys that have worked together and been in the room together a million times. So I think seeing that matchup and specifically what goes on there, Cromer would rather stay with the zone stuff. He'd rather not do a whole lot of different things, but package it in a few different ways so that it's creating different looks, but really getting back to the same bread and butter. And that matchup, I think there's a backstory there that, only guys that have been in those specific meeting rooms can really even understand all of the intricacies of that Cromer, Payton, Dennis Allen matchup in this game. That'll be one of the most fun things to watch because, like you said, that's strength on strength at a league best level.
I'm also going to give props to your man, Nate Weller, for the article that went up on the Sports Info Solutions blog today, which is sportsinfosolutionsblog.com, about how the rushing success of the Rams is set up by not as much by the running backs as by the line and by the style that they play and the way they spread things out and avoid stacked boxes and use motion to confuse defenses. It's a really good look at all the things that go into a running game besides running backs.
Yeah, Nate is a rising star, no doubt about it. Okay, one more note on this thing. We have to talk about Sean Payton, Marcus Peters. Who you got in the celebrity death match there?
Sean Payton and Marcus Peters. Well, Peters didn't have a very good year, did he?
No, he had a rough year, and he had a rough game against Michael Thomas in Week 9. As a lot of people have brought up this week, Aqib Talib was out that game. He was inactive. So Peters was tasked with shadowing Thomas, and Sean Payton really liked that matchup. Michael Thomas had 12 receptions for 211 yards. So let's take a look deeper into this because we can expect in this game with Talib back that he might be spending a little bit more time with Michael Thomas. On the course of the season, Talib averages 8.4 yards per attempt. Peters averages 9.4. But in the slot, there's been a whole different deal. And Michael Thomas is a monster in the slot. He's had 65% of his yards come from the slot this year. And in the Week 9 matchup, he had 157 of those 211 yards from the slot. Peters, for his part, had negative 8.8 total points in the game, our division of credit metric. negative 8.3 of those came up when he was lined in the slot. So against the slot receiver, we talked about overall the splits for Talib and Peters, but against the slot receiver, Talib averages 6.6 yards per attempt on the season, where Peters averages 12.1. So the really big difference here is if Michael Thomas, he'll line up inside, he'll line up outside, and clearly he's done a lot of damage from the slot. Him lining up against Peters in there, that was a huge mismatch. It'll be really interesting to see with Talib being able to line up against him and the Rams being able to avoid that matchup if it goes a little bit differently in this game.
I will note that the Rams, when Talib is healthy, they do tend to leave the cornerbacks on side. So which one travels with Michael Thomas may have to do with where Michael Thomas is lined up at the start of the play. Normally they've got Talib on the offensive right, and they've got Peters on the offensive left. The other thing is the Rams have a very good nickel corner. In fact, the nickel corner they have is the nickel corner, Nickel Roby Coleman. And he allows only 4.4 yards per pass with a 67% success rate in the SIS charting. So would they think of using Nickel Roby Coleman on Thomas when Thomas is in the slot? And I mean, not when Thomas is in the slot, like he's close to the formation, but he's actually the outside receiver of the formation. I mean, when he's actually in the slot. Because I have a feeling a lot of that time where we have Thomas listed in the slot, what it is probably more of a tight split than actually being in between the offensive line and an outside receiver.
Right. Might be a nasty split there as opposed to like the classic definition of a slot. We could look it up both ways there. Okay, I feel like we covered a whole bunch in that game. Anything else you wanted to touch on before we switch over to the Patriots and Chiefs?
Two interesting stats. The first is the bigger the lead that the Rams have this year, the worse their defense gets. When they're down by more than a touchdown, they're third in DVOA. When they're down by one touchdown or less, they're fourth. When they're tied or up by a touchdown, 16th. When they're up by more than a touchdown, 27th. So if they take a lead, it would suggest that the Saints are even more likely to get back into it than the Saints would be otherwise because they're the Saints and their offense is great and they're playing at home. The other thing I will point out is if people look at DVOA stats on our site, it'll look like the Saints are better on special teams than the Rams. But when you take out the backup kickers who played instead of Greg Zuerlein for weeks 2 to 6, the two teams are basically equal in special teams.
Fascinating matchups to look at there. All right, let's go across to the AFC games. And again, we talked about home field advantage and how it applied to the other games. We touched on it in this game. But one thing that Patrick Rowley, our awesome researcher, pointed out is that there are two plays that could have led to this game happening in New England, which I think we all would think would make a huge difference in terms of who would be favored in this one. One, of course, the Miami Miracle. And Pat pulled this stat. Over the last 3 years, down by one score in the fourth quarter with less than 2 minutes left, when a team runs a prevent defense, there's just been one touchdown on 86 throws. And it was literally involving Kenyon Drake and Rob Gronkowski. So that's the only time that we've seen that happen in the last 3 years. The other play that, if it goes differently, this game's happening in New England, is the Pat Mahomes fourth down conversion for 48 yards to Tyreek Hill in the Baltimore game. I think that was the same game as the no-look pass. Either of these,
it's the same week as the Miami Miracle. They were happening simultaneously.
So either of those plays in the same week goes differently, and this is a different story. And I think, looking at Brady's career 28-10 playoff record, 20-3 at home, 3-4 on the road, 5-3, of course, in the Super Bowls. That would make for a different game that we were talking about. And we've already talked about the Chiefs and how they're third in pressure rate at home, 24th on the road. And the Chiefs' home field advantage is really interesting. They've put together 34 consecutive home games, holding opponents under 30 points at home, which is the 10th longest streak all time, 18 games longer than the next closest active streak. And the Patriots are just 5-4 when it held under 30 points this year. The one loss, of course, the Miami Miracle.
I will also give you one more thing about home field advantage. This is a stat that I don't know whether this really means something, but it's one of those stats that's really interesting. And this comes from Dave Brown of the Concord Monitor. He told me about this in the press box last Sunday. The Patriots are horrendous on grass, and they're playing on grass in Kansas City. Most of their worst losses over the last 5 or 6 seasons have come on grass. In the last 6 seasons, on the road, so not at home, just on the road or neutral sites, on artificial surface, Patriots are 21-5 with a 22.2% DVOA. On grass, 13-14 with a 6.4% DVOA. Does that mean something? Like, it's one of those things where it's football and we shrug our shoulders and go small sample size, but that's a huge difference.
I'm trying to think, who do they play on grass? They play the Dolphins. They've had a couple of memorable losses to the Chiefs. I think those were both road games, the Monday Nighters. I can't remember that well, though. I'm trying to think where these games might have happened.
Nissan Stadium, where they lost to Tennessee this year.
Interesting.
Is grass. I don't think Miami is.
Miami's not grass?
I don't think Miami is. I'm looking up Hard Rock Stadium. Wikipedia says the surface is platinum TE paspalum, which certainly sounds like an artificial surface to me.
Does not sound like grass.
It does not sound like grass. But Tennessee, the really bad loss in Tennessee this year was grass. Like you said, bad loss.
Jacksonville, I guess.
Kansas City. Jacksonville is grass. Yep.
So that's really interesting to keep an eye out on. I wonder what would make them struggle. Maybe it's Brady has figured out how to manipulate all of the inflations of the footballs, and
maybe it has to do with the footing, because so much of the Patriots offense depends on, like, I can't think of an offense in the league that depends more on agility over speed.
Right.
Like Edelman, it's not that Edelman is fast. It's that Edelman you can't tackle him in the phone booth, right? He's just, like, really agile. James White, same thing. Maybe it has something to do with the footing on.
Well, it's a precision offense for sure. The West Coast definitely, but you wouldn't think that the Patriots home field really, with all the weather that happens there, you would think that would also affect the precision type offense and that sort of thing.
Right. They switched about I think like a dozen years ago. They switched to artificial. It's artificial turf now at Gillette Stadium.
Right. Very interesting there. All right, looking into this game, one thing that I wanted to look into a little bit more was the loss of Kareem Hunt and what that's meant to the Chiefs, because obviously from a running game perspective, Damian Williams has filled in, and we haven't seen anything really affect their run game too much with it. We did talk a little bit about how they were able to get the ball down the field, and potentially that teams were playing, with a little bit more of a loaded box against them. When Kareem Hunt was in the lineup, and they're playing backed off a little bit more right now. One number that we looked into was the play action yards per attempt. So with Hunt in the lineup, the Chiefs' play action yards per attempt is 10.3, which is third in the NFL. Since his release, they're at 6.0, which is 27th in the league. And then we look at Damian Williams, and we talked about how well he's played. But in terms of pass catching ability, over 4 starts, he's got just 8 receptions for 39 yards. And against the Patriots alone, Hunt had 5 receptions for 105 yards. So the Patriots haven't been great against running backs all year. We've got them at the 10th most receiving yards per game allowed to opposing backs. But that loss of Kareem Hunt and what he brings to the passing game, I'm wondering what sort of effects that'll have on the Chiefs' offense as this one plays out.
The other thing I'm going to say is what sort of I find really interesting in this game is the coverage of who's going to cover. The Patriots are a team that does tend to assign coverage rather than leaving their cornerbacks on sides. In the first game, they did a thing they do a lot. They actually assigned Stephon Gilmore to the number 2 receiver and then doubled the number 1. So you basically had Gilmore essentially erased Sammy Watkins. He had 2 catches all game. And then you had the McCourty twins bracketing Tyreek Hill. That did not work. So you wonder, will they change that this game, or are we going to see the same thing? The other side, I'm a little mind blown. This is where I guess charting stats are missing something that's happening on the field, because the Chiefs have benched veteran Orlando Scandrick in favor of Charvarius Ward, who I think is a rookie. And the charting stats for these two guys are so different. Scandrick, in the charting stats, is one of the best corners in the league this year. 5.4 yards per play, 60% success rate. Charvarius Ward, who replaced him, 10.1 yards per play, 35% success rate. That doesn't sound like a good switch to me.
And was what about the target rate? Were there a lot of targets coming in at the?
There were a lot of targets on Scandrick. Yeah, absolutely.
sometimes I wonder.
But I don't think anybody's avoiding Charvarius Ward.
Right. It's definitely interesting to see there. You'd expect the Chiefs to kind of come with a little bit more man in this game. We saw how Brady sliced up that zone last week. So you'd think that the Chiefs would come with a little bit more of that sort of scheme against them. And I think without Josh Gordon, this might be the first game in a while where he'll be missed because of what he can do against the man coverage. Obviously, you got to find answers for Gronk.
I was going to say, we know that Kendall Fuller was so good last year in Washington. His numbers are not as good this year, right? 8.2 yards per play, 47% success rate. That's probably who's going to be on Julian Edelman a lot of the time. And Edelman had a pretty big game in the first matchup.
I'll be fascinated to watch it. Under pressure will be another thing to look at because like we talked about before, the Chiefs have been so good at creating pressure when they've been playing at home this year. And Brady's pressure splits over the last 2 years are interesting. Last year, he was one of the few quarterbacks who had a better IQR under pressure than he actually did in a clean pocket. And I think that was a big part of the reason why it helped him win his third MVP award. So clean pocket last year, he was at 105. Under pressure, he was at 115. Now this year, the clean pocket IQR pretty consistent, went up a tick to 110, but his pressure IQR plummeted all the way down to 82 under pressure in 2018. Now this is two things. Number one, like we've talked about, clean pocket stats tend to be more consistent year over year than the under pressure stats. But the other thing here is if there's something going on, if the age finally is catching up to him, we've looked at all the indicators and the reasons why he is aging and why he isn't aging. This is an interesting one, and we'll have to look because I think that if the Chiefs win this game, it's going to have to do with their ability to get pressure on Brady.
Well, I think that that's true. And if what you said about home field advantage, that one of the places where it really plays out is in the amount of pressure brought, especially from the outside, then that certainly is a home field advantage that's for real and absolutely favors the Chiefs because they're going to bring a lot of pressure from outside with Justin Houston and Dee Ford.
No doubt about it.
And by the way, this is also where we should point out that while there's a lot of talk about Gronkowski and how Gronkowski seems to have aged about 30 years in the last 8 weeks, what they're mostly doing is leaving him in as a blocker. And that's not just on run play. He's been a dominating blocker, dominating on run plays. But they've also left him in on a lot of pass plays. So don't be surprised if they leave Gronk in. He doesn't go on a route, but he stays in to help block Houston at 4.
So what do you think's going on with that? Is it he can't hold up running down the field anymore?
I have a feeling that he hurts running down the field, so he's doing that less. But it also may just be they want to use him as a blocker more, and he's a fantastic blocker.
Well, definitely when you put the personnel that the Chargers were putting on the field, I think that made a lot of sense.
Right, and the Chiefs' run defense was the worst in the league this year. They did better last week in the first half, certainly, against Indianapolis. They were doing better against the run. But the Patriots should be able to run on them. They had something in the first game. The Patriots had something like, hold on, I'll look up the number. Between Sony Michel and James White, the Patriots had 145 yards on 30 carries. And heck, throw in Kenjon Barner, who's not on the team anymore, and you get another 16 yards on 3 carries. So that's over 5 yards a carry. It's when you're getting over 5 yards a carry that the running game is a viable option. You know, if they can run on Kansas City, especially with the help of Gronk blocking, they're going to run on Kansas City. Cold weather also would suggest more of a running game. And I will point out the Patriots, their best running down by DVOA is not first down, it's second down. So I look for a lot of like those short passes on first down and then the run on second.
Passing to set up those manageable second down situations. Just modern football at its finest. All right. Anything else you wanted to touch on in this one?
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, if we talk special teams at the end of the other game, talk special teams at the end of this game, it's very rare to say this, that's not an advantage for New England, but it's definitely an advantage for Kansas City. New England's special teams were almost broke their incredible streak of being above average in special teams DVOA every year since 1996. They were at 0.1%. They had the worst kickoff coverage in the league. I do not know what is wrong with their kickoff coverage, but I would not be shocked to see the Chiefs take advantage of that with, what's his name, Tremon Smith. I believe that's their kick returner. That'll
be something to look out for. I'm thinking about just building my coaching staff with Dave Tobe and Aaron Cromer after this podcast. Chief special teams just year in and year out seems to be one of the top.
I don't know why. We talked about it last week when we talked about the coaching carousel. I don't know why people are not going after Dave Taub as a head coach. So that beats me, man.
All right. Well, we will sign off. Have an awesome weekend. It'll be one of the best Sundays of the year, and we will be back to talk to you next week. Have a great weekend and enjoy the game.